Before we start the show, I'd like to talk to you about Brandwatch, which is a digital consumer intelligence company. It helps businesses better understand their consumers and buyers with clever software that enables them to analyze conversations from across the web and social media. To find out more, visit brandwatch.com, and you can sign up for up-to-the-minute consumer insights in your inbox each week at brandwatch.com/bulletin. And it's worth mentioning that my business, Automated Creative, uses Brandwatch every single day, and our business would be impossible to deliver without it. So it's of real pride that I welcome them as partners for this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders. And I'm very happy to say this is absolutely no different this week. I'm on a call with Rustom Dastoor, who is Executive Vice President, Integrated Marketing and Communications, North America, at Mastercard. Rustom, for anyone who's listening to this podcast who doesn't know who you are and what you do, could you give them an overview of your career and kind of what you do today?
Sure. Well, firstly, hello, Tom. Thanks for having me. It's going to be fun chatting with you. Who am I and what do I do? That's a great question. Well, I'm a bloke living in Singapore at the moment. I'm in the throes of starting a new role at my employer, Mastercard. So for the last 4 years, I've been out here in Asia running the marketing and communications department. And in about 2 weeks' time, I'll be relocating to New York City and taking the same role, but for North America, so for the US and Canada. So that's who I am in terms of my professional life. Personally, I'm a kid who grew up in Mumbai, India. I left India in the late 90s and began a career on the road that's taken me to New York, to London, to Singapore, now back to New York. And I kind of enjoy living between countries and cultures. So that's who I am and what I do.
So what I would like to know, you enjoy living between cultures and you've moved around, and congrats on the new job. But what's been the best investment of your own time, your own money in your career?
That's a great question, Tom. I've thought about this very often because I've had a career now for 20 years, and I've started thinking more and more about what's worked, what hasn't worked. And the thing that I found has worked best for me is having an agility and a flexibility in going places and doing things that other people might not have been that open to doing. So I've been very fortunate in that I've had many safe spaces in my life, both professionally and personally, comfortable existences, comfortable home, comfortable job, comfortable life. And somehow that's never quite done it for me. I've always said to myself after a few years, time to mix things up. And there's always a risk when you do that. There is a risk in terms of things going wrong. There is a financial risk. There is a personal risk. But I've always sort of wanted to take that risk and seen where it takes me. And I'm on the cusp of this new journey once again, where I'm taking a risk, getting out of a safe space and moving into a new space that will almost certainly make me uncomfortable for a little while. But that's what sort of drives me and motivates me. And that's the journey that I've been on so far. So there's no one thing in terms of, I read a great book or I did a great course or I learned a great lesson. It's more been a willingness to sort of put myself in situations where I'm genuinely uncomfortable and then trying to see if I can work my way out of them. And that sort of gets me to a better place when I'm done with it.
So that sounds amazing, right? Senior marketing dude puts himself in difficult situations all the time and kind of tries to get out of them. So, but that's really easy to say and very hard to do. So I just want to go into that in a bit more detail. How do you know, firstly, when it is time to take that risk?
That time and that sort of answer. So the question comes to you. When that moment comes, the question comes to you, and then you've got to be ready to answer it, either with a yes, I'm willing to take the risk, or no, I'm not willing to take the risk. So I'll give you an example. 4 years ago, I was living in New York. I had a wonderful job at Mastercard in New York. I was living in the city, in New York City. I had a very comfortable very enjoyable life. And then I got the opportunity to come to a country I had never been to and a place where I never knew a single person and start a role leading marketing and communications for Asia Pacific. And the only country I'd ever been to in Asia Pacific was India, which is where I was born and raised. So the question came to me, are you ready to take the risk? I didn't go seeking that question. But when the question came to me, I could have either said, no, I'm very comfortable, things are going well, I really don't need to be doing this right now. Or I could have said, this would drive me further forward. It'll be uncomfortable, it'll be rough for a while. I'm going to have to relocate to a place that I've never been to, make a whole new circle of friends, a whole new circle of professional colleagues, integrate into a new culture. But somehow that's what motivated me to do it. It was precisely that I want a routine that is different from the one that I presently have. Not that there was anything wrong with the one that I had at the time. So that's sort of how the question came to me. And then the answer is, are you going to do it or not do it? And many folks, myself included at some point in my life, will answer the question with, no, I'm not going to do it. And that's fine as well. But for the last 20 years, answering, yes, I'm going to do it, has served me very well.
And what advice would you give to yourself if you could go back in time at the start of those big risks?
So the advice I probably give to myself when I started this journey is, don't fear the unknown. I've come to realize that after 20 years, that you can't really script or plan your life, both professionally and personally. It'll happen as it happens. Be ready for some of those uncertainties. Be opportunistic in taking advantage of things as they come along. Don't look to script and micromanage every aspect of it, which is what I spent my 20s doing, and I thoroughly regret it today. I could have enjoyed my 20s a lot more if I knew then what I know now, which is that I can't control every aspect of my existence. And I'm just going to have to go with the flow and manage it as it comes along.
Some great advice there. But let's move into marketing advice. So I always ask my guests, what is your top marketing tip? What is that silver bullet bit of advice that you find yourself giving out most often?
You know, I talk about this quite often with people on my team, and particularly I keep this thought in mind when I interview folks to join our team. Marketing is not about marketing. Marketing is about connecting with people. And at some level, we're all marketers. You know, you go for a job interview, you're marketing yourself. You go on a date, you're marketing yourself. You try and make friends, you're marketing yourself. And that is intrinsic and inherent to human nature. We are a competitive species, and we want to position ourselves as better or more effective or in any way superior to the other individuals in our species. And marketing is no different. It is a way of delivering an advantage to you, your organization, your products, your services, or whatever it is you're in the business of marketing. So don't think about the process. Think about where you want to get to in the end, which is connecting with people who will integrate with you, who will work with you, and who will get you the outcomes that you're seeking, whether it's a consumer buying a product, whether it's a partner working with you in some capacity, whether it's the media who will talk about you. Marketing is about engagement. And if you engage well, the marketing will take care of itself.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we're at the halfway stage now, and we're going to talk about your shiny new object, which is loyalty in the post-pandemic era. So kind of makes sense to me, but what do you mean by that? Help me understand why this is your shiny new object.
So I think we're all sitting here wondering what life looks like post-pandemic, right? Will everything change? Will nothing change? Will some of it change? What I've come to realize is that the one thing that will likely change is how people view loyalty. Because this pandemic era of 2 years or whatever it turns out to be, 3 years, 4 years, has been so sudden, so disruptive, and so alarming to all of us collectively on this earth that it's bound to make us reevaluate the people, places, and things that we were once loyal to. I know I see that in my own life, professionally and personally. And that's the element that I'm quite keen on wrapping my head around as a marketer for the post-pandemic era.
And what are your predictions at this point? How do you see it playing out?
Look, there's no silver bullet here. There's no way to know for sure. But I'll give you an example of what I think about a lot, right? When you look at the business world, the purveyors of loyalty, the biggest purveyors of loyalty have been airline companies. They have defined loyalty programs. You contribute to those loyalty programs by being loyal to them, flying more miles on their airlines, buying products that they may sell. And what you get in return are a series of points that you can cash in for some freebies along the way. Now, for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, that relationship between airline and traveler has been completely disrupted. So let's say travel resumes to 2019 levels in the year 2023 or 2024. Will we go back to being loyal to those same airlines? If we do, which ones will we be loyal to? Will I be loyal to Singapore Airlines, an airline that I've used frequently? Will I be loyal to Cathay Pacific? Will I be loyal to others? I don't know. When I look at my personal life, for years, I have loved Nike products. I've only bought Nike products for the sports that I play. And all of a sudden, sitting at home all these months, I started exploring other brands, not consciously, but subconsciously. And suddenly, my loyalty as a consumer to a brand seems to have evolved. Why is that? Why has that happened? What can brands do differently to maintain loyalty during this period of time so that the post-pandemic era follows where you've left off during this period of time? So this is something I'm trying to wrap my head around as to what does it mean to be loyal to brands, to people, to places when everything is disrupted and nothing is what you expected it to be.
I'd like to talk a bit about the word itself, loyalty, in a marketing context, because you give the example of airlines. Is it loyalty really, or is it like, as you say, it's getting some free stuff? You're not like loyal to that airline to the point at which, like, if you had one bad flight or two bad flights, or they lost your luggage, or they were rude to you, or the food made you sick, you're not really loyal. Like, if a family member did all those things to you, you'd just forgive them. They're your partner or your dad or your daughter or whatever it is. Like, there's loyalty, which is where you just keep on forgiving and going back almost infinitely. And then there's sort of bought attention or bought custom, which is kind of what an airline loyalty scheme is. How do you feel about the word loyalty in that context? Do you think people are actually loyal to brands, or are they just incentivized not to go elsewhere, which isn't loyalty at all?
Well, that's precisely the point, which is what we have today between consumers and brands is a transactional loyalty. There are probably very few brands that have a genuine loyalty. And we often ask ourselves this question, that should consumers be loyal to brands or should brands be loyal to consumers? I think it's the latter. It's brands who should be loyal to their consumers, not the other way around. It's sort of the same question. Is your dog loyal to you, or are you loyal to your dog? Which one is it? If you didn't feed him, if you didn't bathe him, if you didn't shelter him, would he still be loyal to you? That's sort of the dilemma between a brand and a consumer. And I think for the longest time, brands have asked consumers to be loyal to them and have had this sort of transactional mechanism to say, we're going to buy your loyalty. But that's getting flipped on its head, where it is in fact brands who need to be loyal to their audiences. And that's where probably the loyalty will foster long term. And that's what we need to start thinking about.
So that's a new concept to me, brands being loyal to customers. Can you explain what that means exactly?
Sure. We talked about airlines. You made the point that essentially, what is the relationship out there, right? Is it one that fosters loyalty, or is it just one that fosters a transaction? And you're absolutely right. What we're seeing is increasingly that if you have a relationship with the consumer where it's based on I do something for you, you do something for me, I sell to you, you buy from me, then that's not one that fosters loyalty. But if you have a relationship of one that is service-based, you will find in response that loyalty is more forthcoming. So particularly right now during the pandemic, we should try to serve consumers, not to sell to consumers. And for a business, that's a very different mindset to be taking, particularly when that business is evaluated on a quarterly basis for profits, progress, etc. How do you shift to this mindset of right now, we will serve, not sell? And that service proposition longer term will stand us in good stead when we are ready to sell and people are ready to buy.
So how does that work for an FMCG brand, for example? You sell crisps or nappies or soft drinks. Like they're in the business of selling. How does a soft drink brand serve realistically a consumer whilst maintaining the profits, as you say, that need to show up every quarter?
It's a great question. And there are a few brands that I've always looked at through the lens of, I'm loyal to these brands because I gain something beyond what I buy from them. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Take Starbucks as an example, which is the epitome of a big corporate entity dedicated to making profits. But what I've always appreciated about Starbucks is that when I need to go someplace that is not home and not office, and I just need to chill for about an hour, read a book, just stare out of the window, all I can do is buy a $5 cup of coffee, sit on a couch, and I know no one's going to hassle me for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I can call a friend over. We can sit and have a conversation, and I'll be comfortable. The environment is clean and safe. No one's troubling me. No one's bothering me. And suddenly, while I went to buy a cup of coffee, what I've actually ended up doing is being a guest in their environment for the time that I'm there. And I've always found that to be a reason why I go back to Starbucks as opposed to other coffee shops. And that if Starbucks finally shuttered and walked away, I would miss them. I feel the same way about Barnes & Noble, the bookseller in the US. I love reading books. I love perusing books. I'm not a big fan of buying books online because I like sorting, selecting, the tactile nature of it. And what I love about Barnes & Noble is I can just go there and spend time there. I don't think I've bought anything 90% of the time that I've been in a Barnes & Noble, maybe only 10% of the time. But it's served me in growing me intellectually, giving me a space to go where I feel enthusiastic, where I feel comfortable. It's become part of my chosen set of places, spaces, people, brands to identify and to spend time with. And to me, that's how a brand fosters loyalty long term. If I have to buy a book when I'm in the US, I will always buy it from Barnes & Noble, even though it'll only be 10% of the time that I'm actually in a Barnes & Noble. So I think from my own life experience, what I see when a brand is generous with me, with what they have, when they're willing to share, when they're willing to give, my loyalty is fostered without any loyalty points program or without any kind of transactional relationship between them and me. And I try to apply that same logic in my professional life when I try to build that relationship between a consumer and myself.
That's a lovely thought. The idea of generosity, going above and beyond, creating a different experience. And what I think what's confusing me a little bit, and this is interesting, is that when you talked about the Barnes & Noble experience, you talked about the Starbucks experience, it almost, that is user experience. That is the user experience of the product. Yes, sure, you're buying a $5 hot or cold coffee, but you're also buying access to that feeling of comfort, security, flexibility to do a call, to meet a friend. But I'm sort of stitching two things together here. Is the future of loyalty great user experience?
I think part of it is, for sure. Absolutely. I think part of it is great user experience. Part of it is trust. Part of it is generosity. Part of it is not trying to sell, but to serve. Part of it is looking at a consumer as a long-term relationship, not as someone to be exploited in the short term. I think all of that, but yes, user experience is a big part of that. User experience is probably the manifestation of all of this stuff coming together.
Rustom, I am so sorry, but we have come to the end of the podcast. I could definitely stay talking about this for a very long time, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But I'm going to have to call it a day here. But if I know for a fact there's going to be people who really want to speak to you about this, how would you like them to get in touch with you, and what makes a brilliant outreach message to you?
Sure. Well, the easy way to get in touch with me is social media. You can just Google my name. It'll show up in LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. Pick any one of those that you're comfortable with. Write to me. Professionally, LinkedIn is probably the best way to get in touch with me. You can just search for me on LinkedIn. Personally, you can ping me on Facebook or Instagram. I spend too much time on Instagram, so I'm almost certain to see your message. So that's probably the best way to get to me. And the best message for me is, how do we share ideas and experiences? I'm not looking to sell. I'm not looking to buy. I'm looking to engage. So if that's what you want to do, hit me up. We'll have a conversation.
Fantastic. Rustom, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tim.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at